Torian was putting songs out, videos out. It's only a matter of time before the large audience comes.
Rivalries, feuds, diss tracks. In the rap world, someone's always looking to take the top spot.
It was like we're more real, we're more gangster, we should get more respect than you.
Fierce competition fans the flames of jealousy.
He joined this clique purposely to make them angry and try to perpetuate his career.
I think he was sort of like a wannabe.
Turning a friendly feud into a violent fury.
The love and admiration that he may have once felt for his brother now turns to hate.
He just turned on him.
When someone feels disrespected, the gloves come off.
It was definitely because of jealousy. That's the weakest thing that you could have done. His name was Torian, but to others, they would say T.O.Y. That's the rap, me, I'm T.O.Y. I'm FDAB T.O.Y. Growing up, he was very talented, and he just knew it. People followed him. He was like a leader. I would always tell him that his popularity would bring about unwelcomed attention. He thought that they just hating. They just, so what? I'm fly, so what? Who cares? He didn't take them seriously in regards to the threats. But I think it was his vibrato. He was bold. He was self-assured to a fault.
Born in 1991, Torian Young, or Toy to his family and friends, was raised in the Houston community of Alief.
How old were you when Torian came along?
Oh my gosh, I was 14. My gosh, I blush with that because it's so crazy, and it feels as if it was another lifetime ago. I could have did the friend route because we grew up pretty much essentially in the same generation, but I didn't do that. I made sure that I was his mom. He was my baby.
Toy was our clique baby. A clique is your people that are gonna be there with you. They have a place in your soul. There was a stigma that she's young and she has this baby, and so it was like the adults took it real serious, but the clique is like excited, happy, embracing her like, girl, you got this, we got you.
I look back, he was spoiled. He was like, dare I say, golden child. I remember how wise he was, even as a young kid.
He was a happy child, brought a lot of joy to everybody,
I first met Torian, which we call T.O.Y. Probably around like 13, 14. I got to meet Torian through my older brother, and then we all became family. And we never went nowhere without each other, so we all stayed together. It wasn't no clique, it was more as a family. He's a good person. He'll take his shirt off his back and give it to you. He's a very genuine person. He's very overprotective of people he loves. His mom is his #1 fan. He always calls his mom and asks her advice for anything.
As a teenager, Toy finds his true calling.
Toy, he could rap, He was very talented. He would do his own beats.
And he dated most of the baddest women in Houston.
After getting his GED and starting at Blinn College in 2011, Toy decides to make a life-changing decision and launches a new rap group called FDAB.
They made fly in the so, they were a group of individuals, which Toy, orchestrated, of individuals that was really just different, implemented modern fashion and a modern approach to the rap industry and culture in Houston.
You can't be in FDAB unless you had a job and you was fly. And we was with the ladies, we ladies' mans. FDAB we was family. Toy inspired everybody. He inspired everybody to get into it.
He was very unique. He brought a different style to the culture. A lot of people, followed the style he created.
They call him President TOI because he thought of all of this. He's like this big deal, really about to blow up. He would always have this confidence.
Torian was gonna be a big artist in Houston, putting songs out, videos out, constantly on the internet, tweeting, being followed and watched. It's only a matter of time before the large audience comes.
We had a performance at Ruby Hall. They got off the stage to perform in the crowd. Everybody went nuts. Every time we touched that stage, everybody went nuts. We changed the culture. And then that's when the competition begins. Everybody want to be on top when the first person on top. FDAB started first, then that's when Cream Click fell in line.
In Houston, there were just a bunch of different cliques. There was like Cream Click, Mash Mode, 100, FDAB, that was Toy's clique.
How did rivalry between crews usually play out?
It'll just start off like you and your friends, we're really cool, we're the best, like just a very sort of braggadocious thing. And then another crew might be like, no, you're not, like we are. And it just could escalate.
It's 9:45 p.m. at a fast food restaurant in A-Leaf when an employee makes a frantic call to 911.
Houston Fire and Medical. Hey, no. Hey, are you in there? Ma'am, I need an officer over here as soon as possible.
She says there's been two men who were outside. They were arguing and physically fighting. This is happening on a Friday night at a McDonald's that probably was about to close soon. You had patrons inside. You had kids inside with their guardians or parents.
Then with 911 caller, she hears gunshots. The young man goes into the McDonald's and says, I've been shot, I've been shot.
Do you need an ambulance? Yes, ma'am. Somebody was shot here.
There is now a shooting victim, a young man who is inside the McDonald's bleeding out.
Ma'am, can you please send an ambulance? I don't want this guy to die on me.
First responders arrive and find the victim clinging to life. The victim's friend Josh is there at the scene and identifies him as 20-year-old rapper Torian Young.
EMS takes Toy away, and in the ambulance, one of his friends, Josh, rides with him to Bentop General Hospital, the trauma center in Houston. Then you have patrol officers get on the scene, and it's chaotic. You know, there are a lot of people there. It's a McDonald's in a busy area.
So when officers respond to a scene like that, you know, their goal is going to be whoever was the shooter there, try to locate that person. You're going to want to talk to everybody that's there.
The Houston community is left reeling after a popular local rapper, 20-year-old Torian Young, is shot in a McDonald's parking lot.
This is the end of the day, and I get a repeated call from my mom. And They call back, "Hey, Mom," and she's screaming, "Get to Bentob. Toy's been shot." And I was like, "What?" I froze, told my husband at the time, and we hurried, got to the car, and we're going maybe about 100 miles an hour down 59, trying to head to Bentob. Bentob is our local trauma hospital. I remember going in, and the surgeon is telling everyone to, he's strong, he's young. I'm just rationalizing that my baby is gonna be fine.
Meanwhile, the gunman is still at large.
At the McDonald's, officers are able to find as many people as possible who witnessed what took place. And they're able to find a woman named Fran.
So Fran works at that McDonald's, but she wasn't working on that day. She was just there with one of her friends. So while Fran is there, she sees Toy and Joshua come into the McDonald's, and she knows them.
Fran says Toy and Josh were talking about having a beef with another rap group.
There's a clique called Cream Clique, and they were putting out music, and then FDAB and Toy and his friends, they were also putting out music.
And so you just have these two groups of people where they all were trying to fight for respect and who's the best and who's gonna get the most attention when it comes to their rap skills. Fran let homicide detectives know that this is deeper than just a random fight outside. She says they've been beefing for at least the last couple days.
Street credibility, street respect is very, very important. And if you're being disrespected, that's going to be a source of friction.
Maybe one clique sees a member of a rival, and now it's your clique versus their clique.
Fran explains that the men went out into the parking lot and a fight ensued.
The people who are in the McDonald's saw two groups of guys, so it's a total of 4 men. They're fighting in the parking lot.
Apparently, right as when Toy got to the door of the McDonald's, that's when the shots were fired.
After they've taken witness statements, officers begin searching the premises for evidence.
They're able to find shell casings in the parking lot. And then they're able to ask for the surveillance video. Not only the surveillance video outside in the parking lot, but the surveillance video that showed inside, where you can see Torian running in after he had been shot.
Police focus their efforts on finding the gunman throughout the night, to no avail. The following morning, they receive devastating news from Toy's doctors.
It was maybe like the 15th hour, and I remember leaning down and saying, "I know you're tired, and if you have to go ahead, go. I'm gonna be fine." I'm in his ear, and I'm telling him this, and maybe about 20 or 30 minutes later, he was gone. I am, even now, at 13 years later, it floors me. It floors just for someone to have to see their child that you can't help.
He was very beloved. It was just a sad situation.
I'm just distraught. Like, I can't believe this. Like, he died from what? Now all the questions like, who did it? Where was he?
After he dies, it's no longer an assault. that would be handled by a certain group of detectives. Now it's a homicide, and these are the more experienced detectives. So now they have to put all the pieces together.
When homicide investigators get to the scene, the next stop for them is going to Bentab Hospital.
They go to the hospital to try to get information. Well, they just happen across the same EMT that picked up Torian from the McDonald's. And the EMT told the investigators that, oh, yeah, you're here for that case. Well, yeah, he kept saying Jordan is the one that shot him. Jordan.
Did you know who Jordan was at the time?
Never knew the guy. Never knew his name. In hindsight, I think he was sort of like a wannabe.
"15 hours after being shot in a fast food parking lot in Houston, 20-year-old rapper Torian Young has succumbed to his injuries. Detectives learned that before he passed, Torian had muttered the name of the assailant.
There was an unknown suspect, Jordan, but they don't know his full name.
Detectives meet with Torian's friends and get a major lead.
In this case, they believe it was a young African-American kid from Southwest Houston by the name of Jordan Wilson.
"19-year-old Jordan Wilson was born and raised in Houston."
So Torian Young and Jordan Wilson, they grew up in the same neighborhood. They knew the same people.
Both of them were into the local rap scene.
They were with each other all of the time, making and developing music because that was something that they were passionate about.
In 2011, Jordan expressed interest in joining Toy's group, FDAB.
He wanted to be a part of FDAB. He hung around the guys in FDAB. He was always around us.
He had some songs, but Jordan wasn't really rapping.
Jordan is feeling really pushed to the side with FDAB and Torian's rise.
The fact that Toy is getting all the attention, I think that was what led to that. The jealousy, the wanting to be in your position, but not really putting in the work to get there.
Jordan was already dealing with comparison, jealousy. It's like, I want an opportunity to stand out, and I can't do that in Torian's shadow.
He was tired of him always being in the spotlight because he felt like he could be in the spotlight as well. And so he left to join Cream Clique.
It seems like that he joined this clique purposely to make them angry, to spit in their face, to be with this rival clique and try to perpetuate his career.
It really just came out of nowhere. You know, it caught a lot of people off guard, and Torian didn't even really take him serious.
And as soon as he leaves the clique, Toy's group, FDAB, they take off. They go on a rapid rise.
So at that time, FDAB was really buzzing. They had a song called Trappin', Rappin', Stackin' that was doing pretty well. It had a lot of views.
And if Jordan was already jealous of him, I'm sure that made it even worse.
When somebody's wins start to feel like your loss, that's when comparison turns toxic.
Someone who's unable to process emotions and self-regulate, and their only sense of identity is rooted in his rap career, naturally begins to become enraged. The love and admiration that he may have once felt for his brother Torian now turns to hate.
Armed with these details, police check the two men's social media pages and find evidence of a long-standing beef.
If you're looking at the tweets, Toy was like, oh, well, you were just shouting out FDAB, you were just one of us, basically. And now you're saying F us.
They see months of exchanges that are hostile, back and forth between the two.
Sometimes social media is like pouring kerosene on the fire.
You have observers, and everyone can comment and like and agree or share or retweet.
When Jordan goes to social media to express himself, he finds that he's not receiving the reaction he assumed he would.
Instead, when Toy fired back at Jordan, his community rallied behind him.
Everybody's blasting the Jordan dude, right? Everybody's assassinating his character, right? Laughing with Torian. Now that's a confidence breaker. That's a mental breaker.
So now, not only is Torian attacking me from my perspective, the entire social media community is now attacking me.
You get a bandwagon of people who against him, you know? So now he's embarrassed.
Toy used the feud to fuel his music, which quickly gained attention.
You can't shoot a slug out on Twitter and not expect Toy to respond. He gonna say that he gonna hit that booth. Toy don't do no talking. He gonna hit that booth, he gonna rap about you and put it out. After I seen all the tweets and all the disses and stuff, y'all gotta respect Toy. He's gonna respond through a mic. He didn't go out there and just, oh, this, and that. No, I'm gonna respond in music. That's the best way to do it, to respond in music.
In a hip-hop ecosystem, if you will, it's still based on egos. It's a lot of things happen over disrespect. When someone feels disrespected, the gloves come off.
In order to firmly identify Jordan Wilson as the shooter, police interviewed Toy's friend, Josh.
Josh immediately identified Jordan as suspect.
Jordan said he wanted to fight. They had their fight. Torian turned his back to him. You know, after they had the fight, he was walking away and he shot him.
You have witness statements. You have a name. You have surveillance video. You even have now social media that is telling the story of what the tension was that was developing between these two young men.
Police immediately issue an arrest warrant for Jordan Wilson.
But when they reach out to Jordan's family, they tell police, we haven't seen him since the night of the shooting. So now they're feeling like, okay, this guy is on the run.
And so from law enforcement perspective, there's a shooter. There is a murderer on the loose. And so there's a lot at stake here.
Their concern is he going to do harm to anyone else?
Police have identified 19-year-old Jordan Wilson as the gunman that fatally shot 20-year-old Torian Young outside a Houston fast food restaurant. But when they go to his house to arrest him, Jordan is gone.
So now law enforcement is looking for Jordan, but he's not in any of the places where he should be locally. They're really concerned that he's on the run.
They realized early on, we need to get the U.S. Marshals involved because now we don't know where this person is.
There's someone who has shot someone in cold blood, and you really can't say what else this person might do.
They're reaching out to news stations, and they're trying to get tips from the viewers, from the community, to figure out where Jordan could be. And they start getting a lot of tips. One of the tips, someone claims that Jordan is in Corpus Christi, which is about 3 to 3.5 hours away from Houston, and that he's staying with a friend. They realize that the friend has a registered vehicle. And so that's why they're able to put a bolo out for that vehicle. Then they see the vehicle and they pull over the vehicle during a traffic stop. And lo and behold, they find that Jordan Wilson is behind the wheel.
2 weeks after Torian's death, Jordan Wilson is taken into custody.
So when the police arrest him, they interview him while he's still in Corpus Christi, and he's forthcoming with some of the information. He says that he knows Torian. They've been in a long time beef with each other. They've been going after each other on social media, and that he did agree to even fight with him. But he's trying to make it seem like that the shooting part was an accident.
He says he was just trying to scare him. He put too much pressure on the trigger. He didn't mean to shoot, let alone kill, Torian.
But that doesn't make sense to police at all, especially given the history and everything that they have found.
So he's arrested and he's extradited back to Houston.
As authorities build their case, they look for hard evidence that this was no accident. According to the autopsy, Toy suffered gunshot wounds to his back and his left arm.
Obviously, it's hard to shoot somebody accidentally 2 times.
So what the investigation found was, and from family and friends, that basically they felt that Jordan was jealous of Torian. With Torian, if you look at his videos, his rap songs, his battles, you know, he had like star quality about him and he had skills. And some people feel that Jordan was jealous of that.
That ego, that lust for fame and attention, and the willingness to do whatever it takes to gain that is a very dangerous thing.
I just believe that people sometimes get into these states and, you know, low vibrational errors in their life as to where, you know, they allow negative energy to take over situations. And that's what I just think happened with that situation. Like, at that time, you know, Jordan was a person that looked up to him, you know, and then he just turned on him.
Whatever happened at that moment, I can't explain it. What made him shoot him and what made that go that far. If they was supposed to be cool, they hung out. They was cool for a while.
I mentioned to Toy a few times to disassociate himself with certain people, especially Jordan, but his heart was so big, you know, like he didn't really look at too many things as a threat, you know, because he's a person that held his own as well.
Months pass with no trial date in sight.
It may just be kind of sitting for a little while as we kind of talk to the defense attorneys and figure out what we're doing.
Then, almost 2 years after his arrest, Jordan is back on the streets.
So he has a bond hearing, and he gets a bond of $50,000. A lot of people are bothered by that.
He had such a low bond, like for a murder. And I remember being outraged. Why was it that low?
Nearly 2 years after allegedly killing his former friend turned rap rival Torian Young, 19-year-old Jordan Wilson walks free on bond.
When he gets out, instead of being still and staying at home, he's out living a life, doing the same thing. He's in rap videos again. He's showing his ankle monitor, which to me seems like he's sending an underlying kind of message that I'm going to get away with it.
But in August 2014, Houston police receive a call that Jordan has become entangled in another shocking crime.
Not only is Jordan out doing his rap stuff, he decides that he wants to deal drugs. So him and an associate, they plan on selling some marijuana, robbing a guy for cash. They get the cash, they keep the marijuana.
And when they're driving away from the other person involved in the drug deal, that person fires 2 gunshots towards them, but ends up hitting 2 children who are outside. Thankfully, the children survived and they were not seriously injured. But Jordan and his friend, they then crash the car as they're getting away from the gunshots. And ironically, they crash in the parking lot of the same McDonald's where he's accused of shooting and killing Torian. After the crash, he actually runs towards the McDonald's, and that is where officers are able to arrest him.
Jordan is hauled back to jail, where weapon and drug charges are added to his rap sheet.
I wasn't surprised in the sense of him getting in trouble again because he didn't make good decisions anyway. But I was so heated. A newscaster wanted to talk to me about what was going on, and I was like, absolutely. And so we spoke about it, where I'm like letting them know that the judge dropped the ball, he shouldn't be out. And if he hadn't have gotten the bond, this baby wouldn't have gotten shot.
With Jordan being arrested this second time, it's quickly clear to the judges and everyone involved that he's going to get no bond. His bond is in fact denied.
More than 3 years after the murder, Jordan Wilson's trial finally begins.
For the prosecution, the trial became a little tricky because you have to realize, it's been over 3 years by the time that the trial took place. And they just thought they could go back to the witnesses that they had originally 3 years ago, and the witnesses would give the same statements. But that was not the case. They had trouble finding a lot of the witnesses. They did not want to be found.
There were people that didn't want to be there. It's always a situation where, people don't want to get up on a witness stand in front of other people and then kind of, in their mind, bear responsibility for putting that person in prison.
One witness that came to testify was one of Toy's compadres in their rap entity, Josh, AKA Stacks, a member of FDAB. You could tell he did not want to be there. Even though Toy was his friend, he did not want to be someone who comes to court to be a witness for the prosecution. That could be construed on the streets as being a snitch.
He confirms, yes, the shooter was Jordan Wilson, but then he adds that it was an accident and that Jordan didn't mean to harm Torian. So this created complications for the prosecution because they're trying to prove that intent. And for any family that has someone who dies by way of murder, that family wants justice.
More than 3 years after 20-year-old Torian Young was shot to death, the trial for his alleged killer, Jordan Wilson, is underway when a key witness's testimony complicates the state's case.
One witness said he was there. He saw the two of them arguing. He saw the two of them physically fighting, but he says it was an accident. So it comes down to intent, because you have to realize that Jordan told investigators early on that, yes, I pulled the trigger. So that's not a question. But now it's a question of, was it manslaughter or was it murder? They're saying, look at how these young men were growing up. Look at their lifestyles. Look at their communities. He didn't intend to harm him. It was an accident. It was just emotions, his state of mind. He didn't go into that McDonald's ready to harm Torian.
Murder is the intentional taking of another person's life without legal justification. That was my conscious objective and desire when I pointed that gun at him to kill him or do serious bodily injury. Our theory, it was a reckless shooting, and our recklessness defense was based on what Josh said. He didn't mean to do it, he only meant to scare him.
From the state's perspective, it's clear as day murder, because look at all the social media evidence. You have Torian, who's a rising star, and then you have Jordan, who is jealous about it. And he's constantly getting at him on social media.
It was just a jealousy thing at the end of the day. He's a -0.
Toy thought that they just hating. They just, so what? I'm fly, so what? Who cares?
But I didn't know it spilled over into the streets. We all thought it was just rap. See, there's a difference between rap, because when you're rapping, you in character. So when it spilled over to the streets, then it's real. Jordan came behind them and shot them behind their back while they was walking away. It's not no accident, because you came to kill. You had kill on your mind.
Once the trial was over, it was up to the jury to come out with the verdict as well as decide the sentencing. The jury found Jordan Wilson guilty.
I remember being told that I can do a victim's impact statement. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. I go up, all eyes on me, and I give it to him. I tell him, I told him how he was a coward. I told him how he had to shoot my child in the back because of his cowardice. And I said, you're gonna be in prison. And he jumped up and he hit the table and he said, I'll be back on the field. And the bailiff was like, get out of here. And that was the last I saw him. And I remember being like, oh, I'm so glad this is over.
In Texas, the range of punishment for murder is 5 to life. So it has a massive range of punishment. And there's no guidance for where within that range the sentence should be based on any particular facts about the murder.
The jury sentenced him to 50 years in prison.
What he did was wrong. He deserved what he deserved, because Tori can't come back. We lost a legend. He can't come back.
It was definitely because of jealousy, which is the most asinine thing to even think of. I'm sure his family is destroyed for him not being there. And our families, over jealousy, that's the weakest thing that you could have done. My son was too much for him. He was authentically him. He didn't attempt to be anyone else.
I mean, Toy probably would have been bigger. I think he had a lot of promise. He had a lot of talent. He could rap, It's unfortunate that his life got cut short over like petty beef. So it's really just losing these people at a young age, at an age where they're just starting out and you don't know how big they could have been.
After Toy died, FDAB took a whole pause. So it took us probably like to 2015 to start making music again. Because a piece of my heart died when he died.
I jam his music on YouTube. I got a playlist. I talk about him all the time. I think about him, smile, brings joy to me.
There are people that will go on his timeline, his Facebook page, and be like, man, I was just jamming your song. And just, I'm in awe again. I think it would be a big deal right now.
If you knew him personally, he was a sweetheart. He cared about everybody around him. He tried to protect everybody around him. He wanted to elevate with everybody around him. Like anybody around him, he wanted to bring them with him. You know, he was just, he had a good heart, a big heart, a beautiful heart.
On a quiet December evening in 1994, a routine trip to a bowling alley in Fort Smith, Arkansas, became the beginning of one of the state's most enduring unsolved murder investigations. More than 3 decades later, investigators continue to search for answers, while the name Melissa Witt remains synonymous with a case that has resisted resolution despite advances in forensic science and countless investigative efforts. Melissa Suzanne Witt was 19 years old. Friends and family described her as kind, dependable, and deeply connected to the people around her. She lived with her mother, Mary Ann Witt, and was looking forward to the Christmas season. Like many young adults, her plans for that Friday evening appeared ordinary. There was nothing to suggest that December 1st, 1994, would become the last day anyone would see her alive. That evening, Melissa planned to meet her mother at Bowling World, a popular bowling center in Fort Smith. It was a familiar place, well known within the community. Parking lots were busy, families gathered for league nights, and the atmosphere reflected the normal rhythm of a small American city preparing for the holidays. Melissa arrived before her mother. She never made it inside. When Mary and Witt reached Bowling World later that evening, Melissa was nowhere to be found. At first, there was confusion rather than panic. Perhaps plans had changed. Perhaps she had stepped away briefly. But as minutes turned into hours, concern rapidly escalated. Outside, investigators would later discover Melissa's vehicle still parked in the lot. The car immediately drew attention. Its position suggested that Melissa had arrived exactly as planned. Personal belongings remained inside. Yet signs around the vehicle indicated that something unusual had occurred. Investigators documented evidence consistent with a struggle near the driver's side of the car. Witnesses later reported hearing screams from the parking lot around the time Melissa disappeared, although no one immediately recognized that a violent crime might have been unfolding. In the mid-1990s, parking lot surveillance cameras were far less common than they are today. Bowling World had no extensive digital recording system capable of reconstructing the critical moments. Whatever happened unfolded within minutes, leaving behind only fragments of physical evidence and fading witness memories. Fort Smith police quickly recognized that this was not an ordinary missing person report. Search teams were organized. Volunteers joined officers. Family members desperately hoped Melissa had somehow left voluntarily or would soon contact someone. Instead, every passing hour increased investigators' concern. Law enforcement expanded the search beyond Fort Smith. Officers interviewed friends, relatives, co-workers, and anyone known to have interacted with Melissa in recent days. Detectives attempted to reconstruct her movements hour by hour, searching for even the smallest inconsistency that might point toward a suspect or reveal a motive. Nothing immediately stood out. Melissa had no known history of disappearing. She had not expressed plans to leave. There was no publicly known evidence suggesting she anticipated danger. As the investigation intensified, local media began covering the disappearance daily. Newspapers printed Melissa's photograph. Television stations asked viewers for information. Tips arrived from across Arkansas and neighboring states, but separating useful leads from speculation quickly became one of investigators' greatest challenges. Missing person investigations often depend upon time. The first 48 hours can determine whether evidence survives or disappears forever. Rain, traffic, changing weather, and simple human activity gradually erase traces left at a crime scene. Detectives understood this reality. Every hour mattered. Search efforts expanded into wooded areas, rural roads, abandoned properties, lakes, and fields surrounding Fort Smith. Volunteers walked long lines across rough terrain, hoping to locate any clue that might explain what had happened after Melissa left her car. Days passed. The uncertainty became increasingly painful for those closest to her. For Marion Witt, every telephone call carried hope. Every knock on the door could bring news. Yet no definitive answers came. Then, 6 weeks after Melissa disappeared, the investigation entered a devastating new phase. On January 13th, 1995, a man riding his horse in a remote area of the Ozark National Forest discovered human remains. The location was isolated. Dense woodland surrounded the area. It was miles from the busy parking lot where Melissa had last been seen. Investigators responded immediately. The remains were identified as Melissa Witt. The discovery transformed a missing person investigation into a homicide investigation. According to authorities, Melissa had been the victim of a violent crime. Specific details concerning her injuries have been withheld or discussed only in limited official statements over the years, a decision reflecting both investigative strategy and respect for the victim and her family. For investigators, however, the forest raised as many questions as it answered. Why had this location been chosen? Did the killer know the area? Had Melissa been taken directly there? Or had she been held somewhere else before her body was left in the forest? These questions would remain central to the investigation for decades. Crime scene specialists processed the wooded location carefully. Evidence collection techniques available in 1995 were extensive for their time, but far more limited than those available to modern forensic laboratories. DNA profiling was still developing. Digital databases were incomplete. Geographic profiling and advanced forensic genealogy had yet to transform homicide investigations. Even so, investigators preserved physical evidence with the expectation that future scientific advances might someday reveal what contemporary methods could not. Meanwhile, detectives returned repeatedly to Bowling World. The parking lot remained the last confirmed location where Melissa had been alive. Investigators examined traffic patterns. They reviewed witness statements again and again. Small discrepancies became major points of interest. Several witnesses recalled seeing unfamiliar vehicles in the parking lot that evening. Descriptions varied. Some remembered pickup trucks. Others recalled different passenger vehicles. No single account provided investigators with enough certainty to identify one definitive suspect vehicle. Like many cold cases, the Melissa Witt investigation became a puzzle containing hundreds of pieces without an obvious picture. Every witness remembered something slightly different. Every timeline contained small gaps. Every lead required verification. Over the following months, authorities conducted numerous interviews. Some individuals were questioned multiple times as detectives searched for inconsistencies or previously overlooked details. Law enforcement also examined possible connections between Melissa's case and other violent crimes committed in Arkansas and neighboring states during the same period. Public attention naturally turned toward the possibility of a serial offender. Investigators explored those possibilities. Over the years, various names have surfaced in media reports and public discussion. Some convicted violent offenders operating in the region have been examined as possible persons of interest. However, law enforcement has repeatedly emphasized that no individual has ever been publicly identified as the confirmed killer of Melissa Witt. That distinction remains important. Speculation has never replaced evidence. As forensic science improved through the late 1990s and early 2000s, cold case investigators periodically re-examined physical evidence collected during the original investigation. New laboratory techniques offered opportunities that had not existed when the crime first occurred. Across the United States, decades-old homicide cases were beginning to be solved through DNA analysis. Families who had waited 20 or 30 years suddenly received answers. The Witt investigation became one of many cases that investigators hoped could eventually benefit from similar advances. Yet progress remained frustratingly slow. Every confirmed fact seemed to produce new, unanswered questions. The known timeline remained remarkably brief. Melissa arrived at Bowling World. She never entered the building. Evidence suggested an encounter near her vehicle. 6 weeks later, her body was discovered in a remote forest. Everything between those moments remains uncertain. For Melissa's family, uncertainty became a permanent part of daily life. For detectives, the case became a reminder that even extensive investigations can reach limits imposed by missing evidence, fading memories, and the passage of time. For the community of Fort Smith, the murder shattered assumptions about safety in familiar public places. A routine parking lot, a well-lit business, a young woman following ordinary plans. Those ordinary circumstances made the crime profoundly unsettling. It demonstrated that extraordinary violence can emerge without warning in places that appear completely ordinary. As years turned into decades, Melissa Witt's photograph continued to appear in anniversary news reports. Investigators never officially closed the case. Instead, it became an active cold case, one revisited whenever new technology emerged or credible information reached law enforcement. Some cases disappear from public memory. This one never entirely did. Every anniversary renewed calls for witnesses. Every advance in forensic science renewed cautious optimism. And every passing year underscored the same unresolved question that first confronted investigators in December 1994. Who abducted Melissa Witt from the Bowling World parking lot? And why has that person never been identified? By early January 1995, investigators from the Fort Smith Police Department, assisted by the Sebastian County Sheriff's Office and the Arkansas State Police, had transitioned from an urgent missing person investigation to a complex homicide inquiry. The discovery of Melissa Witt's body in a remote section of the Ozark National Forest confirmed the outcome that her family had feared, but it also marked the beginning of a much larger effort to understand how a seemingly ordinary evening had ended in tragedy. Detectives approached the case by reconstructing Melissa's final confirmed movements. The known timeline remained remarkably short. She had driven to Bowling World on the evening of December 1st, 1994, intending to meet her mother. Her vehicle was found in the parking lot, and evidence indicated that an encounter had occurred near the driver's side. Beyond those established facts, investigators faced significant gaps. The parking lot became the primary crime scene. Every available witness was interviewed, and many were interviewed again as investigators compared recollections collected days or weeks apart. Small differences in memory were expected. Stress, time, and the routine nature of that evening meant that many people had not initially paid close attention to the vehicles or individuals around them. Investigators attempted to identify everyone who had been present at Bowling World that evening. League bowlers, employees, customers, delivery personnel, and nearby business workers were all considered potential witnesses. Detectives hoped that someone had unknowingly observed a critical detail: a vehicle leaving quickly, an unfamiliar individual lingering in the parking lot, or an interaction that seemed insignificant at the time. As often happens in major investigations, hundreds of tips began arriving from the public. Some callers believed they had seen Melissa after the evening of her disappearance. Others reported suspicious vehicles or individuals whose behavior they considered unusual. Every tip required evaluation. Most could eventually be eliminated, but each demanded valuable investigative time and resources. At the same time, forensic specialists carefully examined Melissa's vehicle. Modern audiences often associate forensic investigations with rapid DNA analysis and sophisticated digital technology. In 1994, however, many of those tools either did not exist or were still in the early stages of development. crime scene investigators relied heavily on fingerprints, biological evidence, fibers, trace materials, photographs, and meticulous documentation. Preserving evidence became especially important because investigators recognized that scientific methods would likely improve in the future. Properly stored evidence could potentially answer questions years or even decades later that contemporary technology could not. The location where Melissa's body was found presented another major investigative challenge. The Ozark National Forest covers a vast area of rugged terrain, making it difficult to determine whether the site had been selected randomly or intentionally. Detectives considered several possibilities. The offender might have been familiar with the forest through work, recreation, hunting, or travel. Alternatively, the location may simply have offered isolation and reduced the likelihood of immediate discovery. Determining how long Melissa had remained at another location before being left in the forest also became an important question. Publicly available investigative information has not established a complete answer, and authorities have generally been cautious about releasing details that could compromise the investigation or reveal information known only to the offender. Investigators also examined whether the crime reflected planning or opportunity. Was Melissa specifically targeted, or was she selected because she happened to arrive alone? The available public evidence has never definitively answered that question. As a result, detectives continued to evaluate both possibilities throughout the investigation. During the months following the homicide, law enforcement agencies reviewed reports of similar crimes throughout Arkansas and neighboring states. This process, often referred to as comparative case analysis, seeks patterns that may indicate a common offender. Similar methods of abduction, victim characteristics, geographic proximity, or behavioral evidence can sometimes establish links between separate investigations. Several violent offenders active during the 1990s have been publicly discussed over the years in connection with Melissa's case. Investigators have examined a number of potential persons of interest, particularly individuals convicted of violent crimes in the broader region. However, authorities have consistently stated that no suspect has been publicly identified as the confirmed perpetrator, and no one has been charged with Melissa Witt's murder. That distinction has remained central to the investigation. Public speculation has often exceeded the available evidence, while detectives have emphasized that conclusions must be supported by verifiable facts. As the investigation continued, Melissa's family became important advocates for keeping the case in public view. Like many families affected by unresolved homicides, they faced the difficult balance between grieving a personal loss and participating in an ongoing criminal investigation. Media interviews, anniversary events, and public appeals all served one purpose: encouraging anyone with relevant information to come forward. Law enforcement has frequently noted that cold cases are not truly inactive. Although daily investigative activity may decrease after initial leads have been exhausted, significant developments can occur years later through new witnesses, technological advances, or renewed review of archived evidence. Melissa Witt's case became one such investigation. Throughout the late 1990s and into the 21st century, improvements in DNA technology transformed homicide investigations across the United States. Biological evidence that had once yielded limited results could sometimes produce useful genetic profiles. National databases expanded, allowing investigators to compare evidence against a much larger pool of known offenders. These developments prompted renewed examination of evidence collected during Melissa's investigation. While authorities have acknowledged advances in forensic testing, they have not publicly disclosed every result or every item submitted for analysis. Such confidentiality is common in active homicide investigations, particularly when investigators hope to preserve information that could later help verify a confession or distinguish a genuine suspect from someone seeking attention. Another challenge emerged as years passed: witness memory. Human memory naturally changes over time. Individuals who sincerely wish to help may unintentionally confuse dates, locations, or sequences of events after many years. Detectives, therefore, continued to compare historical witness statements with any newly provided information, looking for consistency rather than relying on recollections alone. Investigators also revisited the broader social context of Fort Smith in 1994. Understanding traffic patterns, commercial activity, local events, and community routines helped reconstruct what a typical Thursday evening near Bowling World would have looked like. Such contextual analysis can identify overlooked opportunities or explain why certain observations were, or were not, noticed by witnesses. The investigation demonstrated how even a crime committed in a public location can leave surprisingly few definitive answers. A brief encounter lasting only minutes may generate limited physical evidence, especially before the widespread use of surveillance cameras, smartphones, and digital location data that investigators routinely rely upon today. For modern investigators reviewing historical cases, this absence of digital evidence presents both limitations and opportunities. Although there are no cell phone location records or extensive surveillance archives from that evening, contemporary forensic methods may extract additional information from preserved physical evidence that could not be interpreted decades earlier. By the early 2000s, Melissa Witt's murder had become one of Arkansas's most recognized cold cases. Detectives continued to encourage public cooperation, emphasizing that seemingly minor information could prove significant when combined with evidence collected years earlier. A single observation, a forgotten conversation, an unexplained trip, a vehicle remembered only after years of reflection. Cold case investigations often progress through precisely such incremental developments rather than dramatic breakthroughs. As the case entered its second decade without an arrest, one fact remained unchanged. The official investigation had never concluded. Evidence continued to be preserved. Leads continued to be evaluated. Detectives remained committed to identifying the person responsible, while acknowledging that solving a decades-old homicide requires patience, careful analysis, and adherence to the same evidentiary standards that govern every criminal prosecution. Melissa Witt's case would ultimately become not only a search for one offender, but also an example of how law enforcement agencies adapt to changing forensic science, evolving investigative techniques, and the enduring hope that unanswered questions can still find answers, even many years after a crime was committed. For investigators, the passage of time can be both an obstacle and an opportunity. When Melissa Witt's homicide investigation entered its later years, the case became part of a larger challenge facing law enforcement agencies across the United States: how to pursue justice when the evidence is decades old, witnesses have moved away, memories have faded, and the tools available at the time of the original investigation have been replaced by far more advanced technology. The investigation did not end when the initial search was completed or when the case disappeared from daily headlines. Like many cold cases, Melissa Witt's case remained an open investigation. Files were preserved. Evidence was maintained. Information continued to be reviewed whenever new developments created an opportunity for progress. The term cold case can sometimes create the impression that an investigation has been abandoned. In reality, many cold cases remain active in a different form. Detectives may not work on them every day, but the possibility of new evidence means they can be reopened, reassessed, and approached with methods that did not exist when the crime first occurred. The 1990s represented a transitional period in criminal investigations. Traditional detective work remained central. Investigators depended heavily on interviews, physical evidence, witness cooperation, and careful reconstruction of events. Many of the digital tools considered standard today, widespread surveillance systems, advanced cell phone data analysis, and large-scale forensic databases, were either unavailable or limited. This meant that investigators working on Melissa Witt's case faced a difficult reality. They had to preserve the integrity of evidence while knowing that future technology might eventually provide answers that were impossible to obtain at the time. Across the country, law enforcement agencies began experiencing similar situations. Thousands of unsolved homicide cases remained open as scientific progress moved rapidly forward. Evidence collected years earlier, once considered inconclusive, was increasingly becoming valuable. DNA technology became one of the most significant developments in modern criminal investigations. In the early stages of forensic DNA analysis, the process was expensive and limited compared with later methods. Over time, laboratories developed more sensitive testing techniques capable of examining smaller biological samples. National databases expanded, allowing investigators to compare DNA profiles from evidence against records connected to known offenders. These advances changed the way detectives approached old investigations. A case that once appeared frozen in time could suddenly move forward because a piece of evidence preserved from the original crime scene gained new meaning through improved analysis. For Melissa Witt's investigation, advances in forensic science created opportunities for continued review. Authorities have periodically examined the available evidence using updated methods when appropriate. However, as is common in active homicide investigations, specific details regarding forensic testing and investigative strategies have not always been publicly released. Maintaining confidentiality can be an important part of protecting an investigation. Information that is not publicly known may later help detectives evaluate statements from potential suspects or determine whether a person has genuine knowledge of the crime. As the years passed, another challenge became increasingly important: the reliability of human memory. Witnesses who provided information in 1994 were recalling events from a time before they understood the significance of what they had seen. A person who noticed a vehicle, a conversation, or an unusual moment might not have considered it important until investigators later explained the circumstances. Decades later, those same memories could become more difficult to separate from assumptions, news reports, or conversations that occurred after the crime. For detectives, reviewing old information requires careful comparison. A new statement must be examined alongside original interviews, documented evidence, and known facts. The goal is not simply to find a story that fits, but to determine whether information can be independently supported. The investigation also reflected a broader change in how society views unresolved crimes. In previous decades, many cold cases received limited attention after the initial investigation period ended. Today, advancements in communication and technology allow families, investigators, and communities to keep cases visible. Public awareness has become an important part of many cold case investigations. Anniversary reports, official appeals, and renewed media coverage can encourage individuals who may have withheld information in the past to contact authorities. Sometimes a person who remains silent for years eventually decides to come forward because circumstances have changed. Investigators have repeatedly emphasized that information considered insignificant at the time may become valuable when combined with other evidence. A name mentioned only once. A vehicle remembered years later. A conversation that seemed ordinary. A connection that was overlooked. Cold cases are often solved through the accumulation of small pieces rather than one dramatic discovery. For the Witt family, the passing years brought a different kind of challenge. While investigators continued their work, family members lived with the absence of certainty that follows unresolved homicide cases. The loss itself was permanent, but the lack of a final explanation created another layer of difficulty. Many families of cold case victims describe the experience as living between two realities. They know what happened to their loved one, but they do not know why it happened or who was responsible. The search for answers becomes a long-term journey involving patience, persistence, and hope. In Fort Smith, Melissa Witt's name remained connected to the continuing effort to solve the case. The investigation became a reminder that crimes committed decades earlier are not necessarily beyond the reach of modern law enforcement. The development of forensic genealogy improved laboratory methods, and expanded information sharing networks have changed the possibilities for investigators. Across the United States, cases that remained unresolved for decades have been reopened and solved because technology provided new opportunities. However, technology alone cannot solve every case. Investigators still depend on people. A witness who decides to speak. A person who recognizes a connection. Someone who remembers a detail and understands its importance. Human cooperation remains one of the most important elements in any investigation. As the decades continued, Melissa Witt's homicide remained unresolved publicly, but the investigation itself continued to represent a broader commitment shared by many cold case units. That time does not erase the importance of seeking justice. Every unsolved case carries unanswered questions. Every preserved piece of evidence represents a possibility. Every future advancement in science creates another opportunity to examine the past. The story of Melissa Witt's case is not only about what remains unknown. It is also about the continuing evolution of criminal investigation and the determination to revisit difficult cases when new paths become available. More than 30 years after Melissa disappeared, the investigation stands as an example of the challenges faced by cold case detectives across the world. It shows how justice can require patience, how evidence can gain new meaning with time, and how the search for answers can continue long after the original headlines have faded. The case remains a reminder that behind every file number is a person, a family, and a community still waiting for resolution. Decades after an investigation begins, a cold case enters a different stage. The urgency of the first hours and days has passed, but the search for answers continues through careful review, new technology, and the determination of investigators who return to evidence collected long ago. The investigation into Melissa Witt's homicide followed this pattern. Like many unresolved cases from the 1990s, it became part of a broader movement within law enforcement, the re-examination of old evidence using modern forensic methods. When Melissa Witt was killed in 1994, investigators worked with the tools available at that time. Crime scene processing depended heavily on traditional methods, including physical documentation, witness interviews, photographs, fingerprints, and the collection of biological materials. Those methods were standard for the era, but forensic science would continue to advance dramatically in the decades that followed. The evolution of technology changed how investigators viewed older cases. Evidence once considered limited could later become significant. A small biological sample, a trace material, or an overlooked detail could potentially provide information that was unavailable years earlier. This transformation has occurred in cold case investigations across the United States. Law enforcement agencies established dedicated units focused specifically on reviewing unsolved crimes. These teams often examine original reports, laboratory records, photographs, and evidence inventories to determine whether modern techniques can provide new opportunities. For Melissa Witt's case, investigators continue to evaluate available information while maintaining the integrity of the investigation. Authorities have not publicly released every detail regarding evidence examinations or investigative methods, but the case has remained recognized as an unresolved homicide requiring continued attention. One of the greatest changes in modern investigations has been the expansion of forensic DNA analysis. During the 1990s, DNA testing was already an important scientific tool, but the technology was still developing. Over time, laboratories improved their ability to analyze smaller and more complex samples. Techniques became more sensitive, databases became larger, and the ability to compare genetic information became increasingly powerful. The development of these methods transformed expectations surrounding cold cases. Families who had waited years for answers began seeing previously impossible breakthroughs. Investigators solved cases that had remained open for decades by applying new scientific methods to old evidence. However, forensic technology is not a guarantee of resolution. A successful forensic examination depends on several factors: whether usable evidence remains, whether it was properly preserved, whether a comparison sample exists, and whether the results provide a clear investigative direction. In many cases, science can narrow possibilities but cannot immediately identify a person responsible. This reality is one of the central challenges of cold case investigations. Another important element is the continued review of investigative records. When a case remains unsolved for many years, new detectives often approach it with a different perspective. They were not involved in the original investigation, which can allow them to examine the information without the same assumptions that existed at the beginning. This process does not mean earlier investigators failed. Initial detectives often worked under intense pressure, limited technology, and incomplete information. Their work created the foundation that later investigators rely upon. A cold case is rarely solved by one person or one moment. Instead, it is often the result of decades of combined effort. Investigators also consider changes in behavioral analysis and criminal investigation techniques. Modern agencies have developed more sophisticated methods for examining patterns, timelines, and connections between cases. These approaches must be used carefully. Similarities between crimes can suggest possibilities, but they do not automatically prove that cases are connected. Investigators must rely on evidence rather than assumptions. Throughout the years, public interest in Melissa Witt's case has remained significant. The case has been featured in news coverage and discussed in the context of unresolved crimes in Arkansas. Continued attention has helped ensure that information remains available and that potential witnesses understand that investigators are still seeking answers. Public cooperation has always been a critical component of cold case investigations. Many cases are solved because someone eventually provides information that changes the direction of an investigation. Sometimes that person is a direct witness. Sometimes it is someone who knew the people involved. Sometimes it is an individual who remembers a detail only after seeing renewed attention surrounding a case. Investigators often emphasize that people should not assume their information is unimportant. A detail that seems insignificant to one person may become meaningful when combined with other evidence. This principle applies especially to crimes from earlier decades, when communities were smaller and records were less digitally connected. Information that was once difficult to organize can now be compared more efficiently through modern databases and investigative systems. The passage of time also changes the circumstances surrounding potential witnesses. People relocate. Relationships change. Individuals may become willing to speak after years of silence. For investigators, every new piece of information must be carefully verified. A statement alone is not enough. It must be examined against established facts and available evidence. This commitment to verification is essential because cold cases often attract public speculation. Over the years, many theories can emerge around unresolved crimes. Some may be based on genuine questions, while others may come from incomplete information or misunderstanding. Professional investigators must separate possibility from proof. In Melissa Witt's case, authorities have maintained that the investigation requires evidence-based conclusions. Public discussion may continue, but only verified information can move a homicide investigation toward a legal resolution. The case also highlights the emotional impact of unresolved crimes. For families, the absence of answers creates a unique form of grief. There's the pain of losing a loved one, combined with the uncertainty of not knowing the complete story. Many families become advocates for awareness, hoping that continued attention will encourage someone with information to come forward. Their efforts serve as a reminder that cold cases are not simply historical events. They involve real people whose lives were changed forever. For law enforcement, each unresolved investigation represents a responsibility that continues over time. The goal remains the same as it was on the day the crime was discovered: to determine what happened, identify the person responsible, and provide answers supported by evidence. As technology continues to develop, investigators gain new tools for examining the past. Archived evidence, once limited by the science of its time, may hold information that becomes accessible through future discoveries. The story of Melissa Witt's case reflects both the difficulty and the possibility of cold case investigations. It demonstrates how justice can require years of persistence and how advances in science can reopen questions that once appeared impossible to answer. A case may become quiet. It may leave the headlines. But for investigators and families, the search does not simply disappear. The evidence remains. The questions remain. And the possibility of answers remains. In the years following Melissa Witt's murder, the investigation became part of a larger story unfolding across the United States. The transformation of cold case investigations through technology, cooperation between agencies, and a renewed commitment to reviewing unresolved crimes. When the case began in 1994, investigators faced many of the same challenges that affected homicide investigations across the country. Evidence had to be collected and preserved using the standards and technology available at the time. Information was gathered through interviews, physical examinations, and traditional investigative methods. Over the following decades, criminal investigations changed significantly. Law enforcement agencies developed new approaches to reviewing older cases. Instead of relying only on the original investigative files, specialized cold case teams began conducting comprehensive evaluations. They examined reports, photographs, evidence records, and previous interviews with the benefit of knowledge gained from years of advancements in forensic science. This process became known as case review. A case review does not mean investigators assume earlier work was incomplete. In many situations, original detectives conducted thorough investigations with the resources available at that time. Instead, a new review allows investigators to ask different questions and consider whether modern tools can provide additional information. For Melissa Witt's case, continued review remained important because the investigation existed across multiple eras of forensic development. The mid-1990s were a period when DNA technology was emerging as a powerful investigative resource. Today, DNA analysis is often associated with solving cold cases, but the technology has undergone significant changes since that period. Modern laboratories can examine smaller samples and use more advanced techniques than were available decades ago. The ability to compare genetic profiles through expanded databases has also changed the possibilities for investigators. However, forensic science remains only one part of a successful investigation. Evidence must first exist. It must have been preserved. It must contain usable information. And even when scientific testing produces results, investigators must still determine how those results connect to the broader circumstances of a case. Cold case investigations require the combination of science, traditional detective work, and careful analysis. Another major change has been the increased cooperation between agencies. A homicide investigation may involve multiple jurisdictions, especially when investigators must examine information across state lines. Cooperation between local departments, state agencies, and specialized units allows investigators to share resources and compare information more effectively. The growth of national law enforcement databases has also changed the investigative landscape. Records that once existed separately can now be compared more efficiently, helping investigators identify possible connections or eliminate unrelated information. At the same time, investigators must approach every potential connection carefully. A similarity between two cases does not automatically prove they are related. A person's presence in a region or a resemblance between crimes may create a question, but only evidence can provide an answer. This distinction is especially important in cases that receive significant public attention. As years passed, Melissa Witt's case continued to receive interest from journalists, investigators, and members of the public. Public awareness can play an important role in cold cases because information from witnesses may emerge long after an initial investigation. People sometimes remember details differently over time. A person who witnessed something in 1994 may not have understood its importance at the moment. Years later, new information or renewed publicity may cause them to reconsider what they saw or heard. For investigators, these developments require patience and careful verification. Every new piece of information must be compared with existing evidence. Every statement must be evaluated. Every possible lead must be examined objectively. The challenge is not simply finding information. It is determining whether that information is reliable and relevant. This approach reflects a fundamental principle of criminal investigation. Conclusions must be based on evidence, not assumptions. Cold cases often generate public theories because unanswered questions naturally create curiosity. Communities want explanations. Families want closure. The public wants to understand how a crime could remain unresolved. But investigators face a different responsibility. Their goal is not to produce a theory. Their goal is to establish facts. For Melissa Witt's family, the passage of time brought both challenges and continued hope. Like many families connected to unresolved homicide cases, they faced the reality that years could pass without the answers they were seeking. Yet the continued existence of an open investigation represented something important. The case had not been forgotten. Across the country, families of cold case victims have played a major role in keeping investigations visible. Their efforts often encourage public cooperation and remind communities that unresolved crimes still affect real people. The story of Melissa Witt's case also reflects a broader question faced by modern law enforcement. How should investigators approach crimes committed before today's technology existed? The answer has been through adaptation. Old evidence can be examined using new methods. Old records can be analyzed with new perspectives. Old information can sometimes become meaningful when placed in a modern investigative framework. This evolution has changed the way authorities view time itself. In the past, many believed that a case became increasingly difficult with each passing year. While time does create challenges, modern science has shown that time can also bring new opportunities. Technology advances. Databases expand. Investigative methods improve. A case that appeared impossible to solve decades earlier may later reveal information that was previously hidden. Still, every cold case carries limitations. Some evidence may no longer exist. Some witnesses may no longer be available. Some questions may remain unanswered despite years of effort. Investigators must work within those realities while continuing to pursue every credible opportunity. The investigation into Melissa Witt's murder remains an example of this ongoing process. It represents the intersection of past and present, the evidence collected in 1994 examined through the possibilities of modern science. More than a simple unsolved case file, it reflects the continuing evolution of criminal justice. It demonstrates how investigations can survive beyond headlines, beyond changing technology, and beyond the passage of decades. The search for answers depends on persistence. It depends on evidence. And it depends on the belief that even cases that remain unresolved for many years can still move forward. Time changes everything about an investigation. The people involved may move to different places. Communities may change. Technology may advance beyond anything investigators could have imagined when a crime first occurred. Yet the central questions of an unsolved case remain unchanged. What happened? Who was responsible? And what evidence may still exist to provide answers? The investigation into Melissa Witt's homicide became part of a larger discussion about how law enforcement agencies handle cases that remain unresolved for years or even decades. It demonstrated the difficulties created by time, but also the possibility that new methods can reopen investigative paths that once appeared closed. When Melissa Witt's case began in 1994, investigators worked in a world very different from today. There were no smartphones recording locations and movements. Digital surveillance systems were far less common. Online databases and instant information sharing between agencies were not yet part of everyday police work. Investigators relied on direct human interaction and physical evidence. Detectives spoke with witnesses. Officers documented the scene. Specialists collected and preserved materials that could potentially reveal information in the future. The foundation of a cold case is often created during those first hours and days. Decisions made at the beginning of an investigation can influence what remains possible years later. As forensic science developed, investigators across the country began returning to older cases with new questions. Evidence that had once produced limited results could be examined again using more advanced methods. This process became a defining feature of modern cold case investigation. Scientific progress has repeatedly shown that the passage of time does not always eliminate the possibility of discovery. In some cases, time allows technology to catch up with unanswered questions. DNA analysis became one of the most important examples of this transformation. The science behind DNA testing changed dramatically from the 1990s onward. Early forensic methods required larger or higher quality samples. Later advancements allowed laboratories to examine smaller amounts of biological material and extract more information. However, the presence of technology does not automatically solve the case. Investigators must still understand the evidence. They must determine where it came from. They must establish how it connects to the crime. And they must ensure that conclusions meet legal standards. A scientific result is only one part of an investigation. It must be combined with timelines, witness accounts, physical evidence, and investigative reasoning. This principle has guided the continued review of many cold cases, including cases where decades have passed since the original crime. Another important development has been the growth of information sharing systems. Modern law enforcement agencies can compare records and investigative data in ways that were impossible in earlier decades. A detail that once remained isolated in a paper file may now be compared with information from multiple sources. This expanded access can create new opportunities. However, it also requires careful judgment. Large amounts of information can create possibilities, but investigators must still separate meaningful evidence from coincidence. Cold cases often involve incomplete information. Some facts are clear, others remain uncertain. Some questions may never be answered unless new evidence appears. Maintaining that distinction is essential. For Melissa Witt's case, public information has established key facts about her disappearance and homicide investigation. However, many details of the investigation remain known only to law enforcement because releasing certain information could affect future investigative efforts. This is common in unresolved criminal cases. Investigators often protect details that could later help determine whether a person has genuine knowledge of the crime. Information withheld from the public may become important if investigators receive new leads or interview potential witnesses. The relationship between investigators and the public is another important part of cold case work. Many cases have been solved because someone eventually decided to share information. That person may not have been a witness in the traditional sense. They may have knowledge about a conversation, a relationship, a location, or an event that seemed unrelated at the time. The challenge is that people do not always recognize the importance of what they know. A memory from decades earlier may seem incomplete. A small observation may appear meaningless. A name or place may not seem connected to a crime. But investigators understand that small details can become significant when placed alongside other evidence. Public awareness, therefore, remains a valuable tool. News reports, official announcements, and community discussions can remind people that unresolved cases still matter. They can also reach individuals who were not aware of the investigation when it first occurred. At the same time, public attention must be balanced with responsibility. Unsolved cases often create speculation. People naturally search for explanations when answers are missing. But speculation can create harm if it replaces evidence-based investigation. For law enforcement, the standard remains the same regardless of how much time has passed. Facts must be verified. Evidence must support conclusions. Suspicions must be tested. This careful approach protects both the integrity of the investigation and the rights of everyone involved. Beyond the investigative process, cold cases also have a lasting impact on communities. In Fort Smith, Melissa Witt's disappearance and death became a painful event remembered by many residents. A case that began in a familiar public location affected not only one family, but an entire community that watched the search for answers continue over many years. Communities often remember cold cases through anniversaries, memorials, and continued calls for information. These moments serve as reminders that unresolved investigations are not simply historical records. They represent lives interrupted and families still seeking understanding. For investigators who work on cold cases, persistence becomes a defining part of the profession. They understand that solving a case after many years may require approaches that did not exist at the beginning. They also understand that every unanswered question represents a responsibility to continue looking. The investigation into Melissa Witt's homicide reflects this ongoing balance between uncertainty and possibility. The passage of time created challenges. Technology created opportunities. Public memory kept the case visible. And continued investigative work maintained the possibility that future developments could provide new information. Cold cases are often described as mysteries from the past. But in reality, they are investigations that exist in the present. They continue through preserved evidence. They continue through evolving science. They continue through the commitment of those searching for answers. For Melissa Witt's case, the passage of decades has changed many things, but one element has remained constant: the effort to understand what happened and to seek resolution through careful, evidence-based investigation. A cold case is defined by what remains unknown, but it is also defined by what remains possible. For investigators, the passage of years does not erase the responsibility to continue examining evidence, reviewing information, and pursuing credible leads. Instead, it changes the nature of the work. The investigation moves from the urgency of the first response into a longer process built on patience, technology, and careful analysis. The homicide investigation involving Melissa Witt became one of many cases across the United States that demonstrated the difficult reality of unresolved crimes. The initial investigation had been conducted during a different era of law enforcement. The tools available to detectives, the way evidence was stored, and the methods used to share information were all different from those used today. Yet the purpose of the investigation remained unchanged: to determine what happened, to understand the circumstances surrounding the crime, and to identify the person responsible through evidence that could withstand legal examination. Over time, investigators developed new strategies for approaching cases that had remained open for many years. Rather than simply reviewing old information, modern cold case investigations often involve a complete reassessment of the original file. Detectives may examine photographs from the original scene, laboratory reports, witness statements, timelines, and investigative notes. They look for information that may have been overlooked, misunderstood, or impossible to interpret with earlier technology. This process requires a balance between respecting previous investigative work and being willing to ask new questions. A case file created decades earlier represents a moment in time. It reflects what investigators knew then, what technology allowed them to discover, and what witnesses were able to remember. A later review brings a different perspective. New investigators may see connections that were not obvious before. New technology may provide opportunities that did not exist at the beginning. New information may change how existing evidence is understood. This is one reason many cold cases remain open for decades. The investigation is not frozen. It evolves. One of the greatest developments affecting unresolved cases has been the advancement of forensic science. Modern laboratories can sometimes analyze evidence that previously produced limited results. However, science must work together with traditional investigative methods. A laboratory result alone does not explain an entire crime. Investigators must understand the context. Where was the evidence found? How is it connected to the scene? Does it match other established facts? Could there be alternative explanations? These questions are essential because criminal investigations require more than possibilities. They require conclusions supported by reliable evidence. The same principle applies to witness information. Witnesses can provide valuable insight, but memories change over time. Human recollection is affected by many factors, including stress, distance, repeated discussions, and exposure to outside information. For investigators revisiting old cases, the challenge is determining which details remain reliable and how they fit with documented evidence. A person who remembers something years later may provide an important piece of information, but that information must be carefully evaluated. Cold case detectives often describe their work as assembling a puzzle. Some pieces are clear, others are damaged or missing. Some pieces may only become understandable when a new discovery changes the entire picture. For the WIT investigation, public information has continued to show that authorities have maintained interest in the case while protecting investigative details that have not been released. This approach is common in homicide investigations. Police agencies often avoid revealing certain evidence because those details may become important in future interviews, suspect evaluations, or legal proceedings. Protecting information can be as important as finding it. The continued investigation also reflects the importance of cooperation between agencies. Modern criminal investigations frequently depend on communication between local, state, and federal resources. Different agencies may contribute specialized knowledge, forensic capabilities, or investigative experience. This cooperation has become increasingly important as cases grow older and more complex. Another factor affecting cold cases is the changing relationship between law enforcement and the public. Decades ago, information about an investigation was often limited to newspaper reports or television broadcasts. Today, digital communication allows cases to remain visible for much longer periods. Public databases, official websites, and online reporting have changed how communities engage with unresolved crimes. This visibility can create opportunities. A person who was unaware of a case years earlier may encounter information later and recognize a connection. Someone who previously dismissed a memory as unimportant may realize that it could help investigators. Time can change circumstances. People may become more willing to speak. Relationships may change. Fear or uncertainty that existed years earlier may no longer exist. For these reasons, investigators continue to encourage anyone with relevant information to come forward, regardless of how much time has passed. At the same time, the search for answers must remain grounded in responsibility. Cold cases often attract attention because unanswered questions naturally create curiosity. But investigations cannot be guided by public theories alone. Every possible lead must be examined. Every claim must be verified. Every conclusion must be supported. This careful process protects the integrity of the investigation and ensures that any future legal action is based on evidence. For families affected by unresolved crimes, this approach can be difficult because time creates emotional challenges. The desire for answers does not disappear simply because years pass. Many families continue to mark anniversaries, participate in awareness efforts, and support investigative reviews. Their involvement keeps attention focused on the fact that every cold case represents a person whose life mattered. Melissa Witt's case remains part of that larger reality. Behind every document, photograph, and evidence record is the story of a young woman whose life ended unexpectedly in a family that continues to live with unanswered questions. Cold case investigations are ultimately about more than solving old crimes. They're about restoring a sense of justice. They're about understanding events that changed lives forever. And they're about ensuring that the passage of time does not remove the importance of seeking the truth. As investigative science continues to advance, cases from previous generations may receive new opportunities for examination. Evidence preserved decades earlier may reveal information that was invisible before. Records once difficult to compare may become more accessible. The future of cold case investigation depends on this combination of persistence and progress. Technology provides new tools. Investigators provide experience and judgment. Communities provide information. Together, these elements create the possibility that even long unresolved cases can continue moving toward answers. For Melissa Witt's investigation, the search remains a reminder of one fundamental principle of criminal justice. A case may become old, but the need for answers does not. Some investigations are measured in days. Others are measured in decades. For cases that remain unresolved, time becomes part of the story. The passage of years changes the people involved, the technology available, and the way society understands criminal investigations. Yet the central purpose remains the same: preserving the search for truth through evidence, patience, and continued effort. The investigation into Melissa Witt's homicide became an example of how a case can remain active long after the initial headlines disappear. While public attention may rise and fall, unresolved investigations continue through records, evidence preservation, and periodic review. For law enforcement agencies, maintaining a cold case requires organization and commitment. Investigative files contain years of information, reports, interviews, photographs, forensic documentation, and details gathered from numerous sources. Keeping those materials accessible allows future investigators to examine the case with new perspectives and new tools. This process has become increasingly important as technology continues to transform criminal investigations. A case originally investigated in the 1990s exists today in a completely different technological environment. Modern investigators have access to digital systems, improved laboratory methods, and investigative databases that were not available when Melissa Witt's case began. However, technology does not replace traditional police work. The foundation of any successful investigation remains the same: understanding the facts, evaluating evidence, and carefully establishing connections. Cold case investigators often begin by asking fundamental questions. What is known with certainty? What information remains incomplete? What evidence exists? What evidence could potentially be re-examined? What opportunities are available today that did not exist decades ago? These questions help separate confirmed information from assumptions. This distinction is especially important in cases that have received public attention. Over many years, discussions about unresolved crimes can create numerous theories. Some may come from genuine attempts to understand the case, while others may be based on incomplete information. Professional investigations must follow a different path. They require verification. They require documentation. They require evidence that can be examined and challenged through legal processes. The continued review of cold cases also highlights the importance of preserving original evidence. Without careful preservation, future scientific advances may not be possible. Evidence collected decades earlier can become valuable again when laboratories develop new methods of examination. Across the United States, many investigations have been renewed because old evidence was revisited with modern technology. These cases demonstrate that scientific progress can change the possibilities of what investigators can discover. But every case remains unique. The quality and availability of evidence vary. The circumstances of each investigation are different, and no technology can guarantee a result. This reality is part of the challenge faced by detectives who work on unresolved crimes. They must remain open to new possibilities while avoiding conclusions that are not supported by facts. The role of witnesses also remains essential. As years pass, individuals connected to an investigation may gain new information or reconsider memories from the past. Someone who once believed they had nothing important to contribute may later recognize that a detail could help investigators. Cold case teams often emphasize that there is no expiration date on providing information. Even a small detail can become meaningful when combined with other evidence. This is one of the reasons law enforcement agencies continue public appeals in unresolved cases. They're not only seeking direct witnesses to a crime. They are also seeking anyone who may have knowledge that helps clarify events surrounding the investigation. For communities, unresolved cases often become part of collective memory. A crime that occurred decades earlier may still be remembered because it affected a neighborhood, a city, or people who knew the victim. Public remembrance serves as a reminder that the individuals involved were not simply names in an investigative file. They were people with families, friendships, and futures. Melissa Witt's case has remained significant because of this human element. Beyond the investigative questions, there's the reality that a young woman's life was taken and that those who knew her have lived with unanswered questions. Cold cases represent a unique challenge because justice is often delayed, but the importance of justice does not diminish. For investigators, every reopened file represents the possibility of learning something new. For families, every review represents hope that additional information may emerge. For communities, every reminder represents the possibility that someone with knowledge may decide to come forward. The modern approach to cold case investigations reflects a broader understanding of justice. Solving a case is not only about identifying a person responsible. It is also about establishing a reliable record of what happened. Accuracy matters. Evidence matters. The truth matters. This is why investigators must often move carefully, even when public pressure demands immediate answers. A rushed conclusion can damage an investigation, while a careful approach preserves the possibility of a successful outcome. Over the years, Melissa Witt's homicide investigation has existed within this balance between patience and progress. The case represents the difficulties of investigating crimes from another era. It also represents the possibilities created by modern science and continued dedication. The story of cold cases is ultimately a story about persistence. It is about investigators who continue reviewing information. It is about families who continue seeking answers. It is about communities that refuse to forget. And it is about the belief that time alone should not determine whether justice is possible. As forensic methods continue to develop and investigative resources continue to expand, cases once considered impossible may receive new opportunities for examination. The future may bring discoveries that could not have been imagined when the original investigation began. Until then, the case remains a reminder of the enduring responsibility shared by law enforcement and society to continue searching for answers while respecting the evidence and the people whose lives are connected to the investigation. A cold case is not simply an unfinished chapter from the past. It is an ongoing effort to understand the truth. The nature of criminal investigation has changed dramatically since the 1990s. What once depended almost entirely on physical evidence, eyewitness accounts, and traditional detective work has expanded into a field shaped by advanced science, digital information, and international cooperation. For cold cases, this evolution has created new possibilities. A case that once reached a point where investigators had exhausted available options can now be viewed through a different lens. Old evidence can be examined with new technology. Historical records can be organized in new ways. Previous interviews can be compared with information that was unavailable decades earlier. The investigation into Melissa Witt's homicide exists within this changing landscape. When the case began in 1994, investigators worked under circumstances that were common for that era. There were no widespread digital surveillance networks. Personal technology did not create the detailed records available today. Investigators depended heavily on physical evidence and the cooperation of people who may have witnessed events or possessed relevant information. Those early investigative efforts created the foundation for everything that followed. Every report written, every interview recorded, every piece of evidence collected. Each became part of a permanent record that could be reviewed by future investigators. The importance of preserving investigative history cannot be underestimated. In cold cases, the original work often becomes the starting point for new examination years later. Modern detectives approaching older cases frequently begin by reconstructing the original timeline. They study what is known, identify gaps, and determine whether advancements in technology or investigative methods provide new opportunities. This process requires discipline. Investigators must avoid the temptation to assume that every unanswered question has a simple explanation. Instead, they must carefully examine what the evidence supports and what remains uncertain. Cold cases are often complicated because the passage of time affects almost every element of an investigation. Physical locations change. People move away. Memories become less precise. Records may become harder to locate. Yet time can also create opportunities. Scientific methods improve. New databases become available. Individuals who previously remained silent may decide to provide information. This balance between challenge and opportunity defines many long-term investigations. One of the most significant developments in recent decades has been the expansion of forensic databases. Information sharing between agencies has allowed investigators to compare evidence and records more efficiently than ever before. However, technology is not a replacement for careful analysis. A database match, a laboratory result, or a new piece of information must still be evaluated within the full context of a case. Investigators must determine whether a connection is meaningful. They must consider alternative explanations. They must ensure that conclusions are supported by evidence. This careful approach protects the integrity of the justice system. In unresolved homicide cases, the goal is not simply to find an answer. The goal is to find the correct answer. This principle has guided the continued attention given to Melissa Witt's case. Publicly available information confirms the major events surrounding the investigation, but many details remain limited to authorities because of the ongoing nature of the case. Protecting investigative information is a common practice designed to preserve future opportunities. For example, certain details may be important when evaluating information from future witnesses or assessing whether someone has genuine knowledge of events. Releasing too much information can sometimes make it more difficult to distinguish reliable information from false claims. Cold case investigations therefore exist between two important responsibilities. The first is transparency, keeping the public informed and encouraging cooperation. The second is protecting the investigation itself. Finding the right balance is a challenge faced by law enforcement agencies around the world. Another important aspect of long-term investigations is the role of families. For relatives of victims, a case does not become historical simply because years have passed. The loss remains personal. The unanswered questions remain present. Many families of cold case victims become advocates for awareness. They participate in interviews, support public information campaigns, and work to ensure that their loved one's story remains known. Their involvement often helps investigators maintain public attention and reach people who may possess valuable information. The public can play a meaningful role in unresolved investigations. A person who was not ready to speak years earlier may eventually come forward. Someone who dismissed a memory may later realize its importance. A witness who moved away may discover renewed coverage of the case and decide to contact authorities. These possibilities are why investigators continue to encourage communication, even decades later. The history of cold case investigations shows that breakthroughs often come unexpectedly. A case may remain unchanged for years. Then a new piece of information can alter the direction of the investigation. A technological advancement can reveal previously hidden evidence. A connection between separate records can create a new investigative path. These developments demonstrate why unresolved cases remain open. The absence of answers today does not mean answers are impossible tomorrow. The investigation into Melissa Witt's homicide also reflects the broader evolution of criminal justice. It shows how law enforcement has adapted to changing technology while maintaining the fundamental principles of investigation. Evidence must be preserved. Information must be verified. Conclusions must be supported. Justice must be based on facts. As the years continue, the case remains part of the ongoing effort to understand unresolved crimes and the challenges faced by investigators working across generations of technology. The story is not only about what is unknown. It is also about the continuing process of searching, reviewing, and learning. Every cold case carries unanswered questions. But every cold case also carries the possibility that new information may emerge. That possibility is what keeps investigations alive. And that possibility is why investigators continue looking beyond the limitations of the past, using every available resource to pursue answers that have remained out of reach for years. More than 3 decades after Melissa Witt's homicide investigation began, the case remains a reminder of one of the most difficult challenges in criminal justice: the search for answers when time has passed and many questions remain unresolved. For investigators who work on cold cases, time is not simply a measurement of years. It represents changing circumstances, evolving technology, and the continuous effort required to revisit information that may one day provide new understanding. A cold case does not remain frozen. It changes. The people involved change. The tools available to investigators change. The methods used to examine evidence change. But the responsibility to seek answers remains the same. When Melissa Witt disappeared in December 1994, investigators immediately began the process of gathering information and reconstructing events. The discovery of her remains weeks later transformed the investigation into a homicide case and began a search that would continue across multiple generations of law enforcement. The years that followed reflected the reality of many unresolved investigations. Initial efforts may identify important facts, but still leave unanswered questions. Leads may be investigated and eliminated. Evidence may be reviewed without producing a definitive conclusion. This does not mean an investigation has failed. Criminal cases are often solved through persistence over time. Many homicide investigations require repeated examination because the circumstances surrounding a crime may not become fully understandable until new information becomes available. This is especially true for cases from earlier decades, when investigative resources were different from those available today. The advancement of forensic science has changed the possibilities surrounding cold cases. Modern laboratories can sometimes examine evidence in ways that were not possible when a crime originally occurred. However, the process remains complex. Technology can provide information, but investigators must interpret that information correctly. A forensic result must be connected to the circumstances of the case. A possible lead must be tested against known facts. A theory must be supported by evidence. This careful approach is essential because the consequences of an incorrect conclusion can be significant. For investigators, the objective is not simply closure. It is justice based on truth. The importance of accuracy becomes even greater in cases that have received public attention. When a crime remains unsolved for many years, public discussion often grows. People search for explanations, and many theories may appear. However, official investigations must follow a different standard. Evidence must guide the process. Not assumptions, not rumors, not speculation. This principle has remained important throughout the investigation into Melissa Witt's death. While the case has generated continued public interest, authorities have maintained that any conclusion must be supported by verified information. The protection of investigative details is another important part of maintaining a case. Law enforcement agencies often withhold certain information because it may become valuable in future investigative steps. Details known only to investigators can help evaluate the credibility of statements, distinguish accurate information from false claims, and protect the possibility of successful prosecution if new evidence emerges. Cold cases also demonstrate the importance of community involvement. A person who knows something about an unresolved crime may not always understand the significance of that information. They may believe a memory is too old, too incomplete, or too ordinary to matter. Yet investigators know that many breakthroughs begin with small details. A conversation remembered years later. A location connected to an old event. A piece of information that becomes meaningful only after new developments occur. This is why law enforcement agencies continue to encourage anyone with relevant information to come forward, regardless of how much time has passed. The passage of decades does not remove the value of information. For families, continued attention to a cold case carries a different meaning. An unresolved investigation is not simply a professional challenge for detectives. It represents a personal loss that continues over time. Families of homicide victims often describe the experience as living without complete answers. They know that a loved one is gone, but they may still seek a clearer understanding of what happened. The search for justice becomes part of their lives. This human dimension is one of the most important reasons cold cases remain significant. Behind every investigation file is a person. Behind every statistic is a family. Behind every unanswered question is a story that deserves careful attention. Melissa Witt's case has remained part of that larger conversation about how society remembers victims and continues pursuing unresolved crimes. It represents the challenges faced by investigators working with evidence from another era. It represents the importance of adapting to new scientific discoveries. And it represents the determination required to continue searching even when answers do not come quickly. Across the country, cold case units continue reviewing old investigations because experience has shown that time does not always close the door on discovery. New technology can reveal information. New investigators can identify overlooked connections. New witnesses can provide important details. A case that seems quiet may still contain possibilities. The future of an investigation can depend on developments that cannot always be predicted. This uncertainty is what makes cold case work both challenging and meaningful. Investigators must accept that some questions may remain unanswered for years. At the same time, they must continue searching because the possibility of resolution remains. The story of Melissa Witt's homicide investigation reflects this reality. It is a story of loss, unanswered questions, and the ongoing effort to understand the past through the tools of the present. It is also a reminder that justice is not limited by calendar. Years may pass. Technology may change. Generations may move forward. But the search for truth continues. For investigators, families, and communities affected by unresolved crimes, that commitment remains the foundation of every cold case investigation. Because every unanswered case represents not only a mystery to be solved, but a life that should never be forgotten. Every cold case eventually reaches a point where its significance extends beyond the investigation itself. It becomes part of the history of a community. It becomes a measure of how criminal justice evolves. Most importantly, it becomes a reminder that behind every case file is a human life whose story deserves to be remembered with dignity and accuracy. More than 3 decades after Melissa Witt disappeared on the evening of December 1st, 1994, the investigation remains officially unresolved. While technology has advanced and investigative methods have changed dramatically since the mid-1990s, no one has been publicly identified by law enforcement as the person responsible for her murder. That fact remains one of the defining features of the case. For many observers, an unsolved case can appear static. In reality, it is anything but. Evidence continues to be preserved. Investigative files continue to exist. Advances in forensic science continue to create opportunities that did not exist when the original investigation began. Every major breakthrough in criminal investigation reminds detectives that today's limitations may not be tomorrow's. Throughout the United States, numerous homicide investigations once considered impossible to solve have eventually reached resolution through a combination of preserved evidence, scientific progress, and persistent investigative work. Those cases have reinforced an important principle within modern law enforcement. Time alone does not determine whether justice is possible. Instead, success often depends on preparation. Evidence must have been carefully collected. Records must have been accurately maintained. Investigators must remain willing to review old information with fresh eyes. These lessons extend well beyond any single investigation. Melissa Witt's case has become part of the broader history of cold case investigation in America. It is frequently referenced when discussing the importance of evidence preservation, interagency cooperation, and the continuing development of forensic science. The investigation also illustrates another reality that receives less attention. Not every question has an immediate answer. Public interest in unresolved crimes often creates pressure for certainty. People naturally seek explanations for events that seem difficult to understand. Yet responsible investigations cannot substitute speculation for evidence. Investigators have consistently emphasized the importance of following verified facts. That commitment protects both the integrity of the investigation and the possibility of future prosecution should sufficient evidence emerge. For this reason, law enforcement agencies often continue withholding certain investigative details even after many years. Information known only to investigators may one day help evaluate the credibility of a witness, distinguish a genuine confession from a false one, or corroborate newly discovered evidence. Patience, while often frustrating, can become one of the investigation's greatest strengths. The passage of time has also highlighted the role of the public. Cold cases are rarely solved through science alone. Scientific analysis can identify evidence. Technology can organize information. Databases can reveal connections. But people remain essential. Witnesses, family members, community members, individuals who remember conversations, observations, or circumstances that once seemed insignificant. Investigators continue encouraging anyone with credible information to contact law enforcement because history has shown that meaningful developments sometimes begin with the smallest detail. Melissa Witt's case has also become a reminder of the importance of treating victims as individuals rather than simply subjects of investigation. She was not merely the focus of a criminal case. She was a daughter. She had family, friends, plans for the future, and a life interrupted by violence. Remembering that humanity is essential to understanding why unresolved investigations matter. For families affected by homicide, the search for answers is not measured only by legal outcomes. It is measured by remembrance, by the willingness of investigators to continue working, by the commitment of communities to preserve memory rather than allow it to disappear. Across the decades, advances in forensic science have transformed criminal investigation in remarkable ways. DNA analysis has become more sensitive. Evidence management has become more sophisticated. Communication between agencies has improved. Digital systems have expanded the ability to compare information across jurisdictions. Each advancement increases the potential for future progress, not only in Melissa Witt's case, but in thousands of unresolved investigations around the world. Still, technology has limits. No scientific instrument can replace careful investigative judgment. No database can substitute for credible evidence. No laboratory result can remove the need for thorough legal review. Justice requires more than discovery. It requires proof. That principle remains central to every homicide investigation. As this documentary concludes, the story of Melissa Witt's case remains unfinished in one important respect. The investigation continues. The questions remain. The official search for answers has not ended. While the public record does not provide every detail, it clearly demonstrates the dedication of investigators who have preserved evidence, reviewed information over the years, and continued seeking opportunities created by advances in science and investigative practice. Cases like this also leave a broader legacy. They encourage improvements in forensic procedures. They influence evidence preservation standards. They remind investigators of the importance of documenting every observation, no matter how small it may appear at the time. Future cases may be solved because lessons were learned from investigations that came before them. For communities, the legacy is equally important. Remembering unresolved crimes is not about preserving fear. It is about honoring victims, supporting families, and recognizing the continuing importance of truth and accountability. History is filled with investigations that remained unresolved for years before new evidence finally emerged. Whether that day will come in Melissa Witt's case remains unknown. What is known is that the investigation has endured because those responsible for pursuing it have continued to preserve the possibility of answers. That enduring commitment may be the most important lesson of all. Cold cases remind us that justice is not defined solely by speed. It is defined by perseverance, by careful examination, by respect for evidence, and by the belief that every victim deserves to be remembered not for the mystery surrounding their death, but for the value of the life they lived. For Melissa Witt, that remembrance continues. For her family, the search for answers remains meaningful. For investigators, the case stands as an ongoing responsibility. And for the public, it serves as a reminder that even when certainty remains out of reach, the pursuit of truth is a commitment that does not expire. The story of Melissa Witt's case does not conclude with a definitive answer. Instead, it becomes part of a larger story, one that extends beyond a single investigation and reflects the continuing evolution of criminal justice. Across the United States, thousands of homicide investigations remain open. Some are decades old. Others have waited generations for new evidence. Yet the experience of law enforcement agencies has shown that the passage of time does not necessarily end the possibility of resolution. In recent years, advances in forensic science, evidence preservation, and investigative collaboration have changed how agencies approach unsolved crimes. Techniques that were unavailable in the mid-1990s are now routinely considered when reviewing historical evidence. At the same time, investigators continue to emphasize that scientific progress is only one part of the process. Every successful investigation depends on careful documentation, responsible evidence handling, and the willingness to revisit earlier conclusions when new information becomes available. Melissa Witt's case illustrates why those principles matter. The original investigation created a record that has allowed later detectives to continue reviewing the evidence. Although no arrest has been publicly announced, the preservation of investigative materials ensures that future opportunities remain possible should new information or improved forensic methods emerge. Cold case investigations also demonstrate the importance of public cooperation. Law enforcement agencies frequently remind communities that information does not lose value simply because years have passed. A witness who remembers a conversation, a vehicle, or an unusual event may possess information that gains significance when combined with other evidence. For that reason, authorities continue to encourage anyone with credible, first-hand knowledge related to an open investigation to contact the appropriate law enforcement agency rather than rely on public speculation. This distinction is important. Unresolved cases often generate theories, particularly through online discussions and social media. While public interest can help maintain awareness, investigators must distinguish verified evidence from assumptions. Every lead requires careful evaluation before it can contribute to an official investigation. That commitment protects both the integrity of the case and the rights of everyone involved. Melissa Witt's case also reminds us of another responsibility, remembering the victim as a person, not simply as the subject of an unsolved investigation. Behind every case file is a life. Behind every evidence log is a family. Behind every anniversary is a community that continues to hope for answers. For investigators, preserving that perspective is essential. Solving a cold case is not only about identifying an offender. It is also about providing an accurate historical record, supporting surviving family members, and ensuring that justice is pursued through lawful and reliable evidence. The broader legacy of cases like Melissa Witt's extends into the future of criminal investigation. Lessons learned from one investigation often influence others. Improvements in evidence collection, forensic standards, interagency cooperation, and case management have all been shaped by experience accumulated over many years. These developments benefit not only one case, but countless investigations that follow. Whether Melissa Witt's homicide will ultimately be solved remains unknown in the public record. What is known is that the case continues to represent the enduring principles of cold case investigation. Preserve the evidence, follow the facts, remain open to new information, and allow conclusions to be guided by verifiable proof rather than speculation. For documentary audiences, the case offers more than an unsolved mystery. It provides insight into how criminal investigations evolve, how forensic science continues to advance, and why unresolved cases remain active long after they disappear from the headlines. The search for truth is often measured not in days or months, but in persistence. And while some questions remain unanswered, the commitment to seeking those answers continues through science, through careful investigation, and through the determination not to forget those whose stories remain unfinished.